This is Theology Bits, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. I'm Pastor Ben. This video is the third in our series, Open Commensality in the Gospel of Luke, when Jesus eats with others. The first video we had was about the relationship between eating and worship. The last video was who does Jesus eat with, which were sinners, tax collectors, and disciples. The only exceptions is 2 times Jesus does eat with Pharisees in the Gospel of Luke. Today, this video will talk about hospitality. What's the whole thing about? What is this? We know that eating is significant. We know the groups Jesus eats with. And now, kind of tying it all together, why does this matter? Well, first is that in the Gospel of Luke, there is a clear message of radical welcome. Jesus has debates with Pharisees and other religious leaders about the kingdom of God. But interestingly, the one thing that does not seem to be in question is the nature of the kingdom of God, meaning what this thing is. In fact, Jesus never defines it. They all seem to agree. Now, where there is a radical change of who is going to be included and who is going to be excluded in this kingdom of God. Now Jesus has a very different message. And it turns out that people like sinners and tax collectors and disciples and the poor and the marginalized are going to be exactly who enters the kingdom of God rather than religious elites per se. And so Jesus's meals symbolize who is included. Now, the meals are not the kingdom of God, at least not directly, but they seem to be one leads to the next. Who's included and why? Well, first is to understand what this welcome is. So, to understand Jesus' message of welcome, it's interesting that one thing in this open commensality that Jesus eats, one thing Jesus never does is Jesus does not ever prepare a meal and feed other people. You would think that if it was about welcoming others into the fold, Jesus would do that himself. Jesus doesn't prepare a meal. The closest thing he gets is at the Passover, he directs his disciples to prepare a meal. But usually that's not the case. Usually, when Jesus is about the welcome, it's how Jesus receives welcome from others. We also know that when Jesus sends out the disciples, a key aspect is how will they be received by communities that they come to. So Jesus himself receives welcome from others, but Jesus also wants to do more than just receiving welcome. He kind of wants to invite as well. So he does something very interesting. He invites people to other people's table. Sometimes he kind of invites himself. Like in the story of Levi, where he says, I'm going to come dine in your house today, or Zacchaeus, tax collectors, I'm going to go dine in your house today. Meaning, Jesus doesn't put on the meal, but he does invite the meal to happen. Very interesting. So this message of radical welcome includes how people can be hospitable. Jesus provides opportunity for others to be hospitable. And one thing that you find is Jesus never does, that we know of, is refuses an invitation, even from the Pharisees. It only happens twice. But Jesus does not refuse an invitation. Instead, Jesus is going to be this is part of how you welcome Jesus into this space. And to understand this, we need to understand a little bit about what is going on with this welcome. Well, there's a way to think about this, which is the question of abundance, scarcity, and sufficiency. If you look back a long time on a video about stewardship on Central's channel, you'll find a video on these three questions and looking at a stewardship of sufficiency. But that, on the one hand, you have stories like the feeding of the 5,000, where there seems to be more food than you could possibly imagine from such a meager source. And so you have this, there's plenty of food. There's plenty to go around. However, and so that's part of the whole idea is, if you could see there's plenty to go around and understand this from a space of sufficiency, there's plenty to go around as long as people only eat as much as they need, then there is enough. But that only works if we don't fall for a stewardship of scarcity, where there is enough, but only if we share equitably. That is, the feeding of 5,000, more than enough food, but only if everybody gets the same amount. Humans can hoard wealth. The story of the rich fool, for example, wherein this person has really good crops. It's a parable, but this person has really good crops, and so with these new crops, he grows bigger barns, and so then he could store all his crops. And then God speaks to him and said, "You fool, this very day your life will be taken from you." With this idea that what he never does is seem to even possibly think that this should be for everyone, or there is sufficiency year to year. You don't need to be able to hoard this in that same way. And so we have this dynamic of there's absolutely enough, there is an abundancy, as long as we don't fall for a scarcity dynamic. And so hospitality is in this frame of we must not fall victim to a theology of scarcity. Instead, we welcome all to the table, and when they come to the table, you honor the other above the self. Very important, because how can you share with others if you think they're below you? In fact, you can only properly share for enough to go around for everyone if you honor others above the self and you're counting on them honoring you more than themselves. There you can have true community hospitality together. Martin Luther says in his Freedom of the Christian, I'm paraphrasing, is that I don't need to be concerned with my own well-being because my neighbor is. And I'm concerned with my neighbor's well-being. He wasn't reflecting on the Gospel of Luke, but the Gospel of Luke would have agreed that there is hospitality. Interestingly, when Jesus sends out his disciples, it's all about how they'll be received in hospitality. That is, when people welcome them into their homes and feed them. Interestingly, it is not about when do they believe the message that you're presenting. It's instead, how do they receive you? It's a very human story. A human is before you, needs some food. Are you going to share? And so this theology of hospitality gets back to, so what is this kingdom of God? Who gets to be included? Well, it's to say there is sufficiency and abundance with this kingdom of God. There's more than enough, and that it's not about how specifically you believe in it, though Jesus does care about belief, but specifically, how do you receive those around you? How do you bring these in? How do you say we'll worship together? And there we have the sinners, the tax collectors, the disciples, and yes, the Pharisees. Both times when Jesus eats with the Pharisees, it leads to a lesson through a negative interaction, but I think it's also meant to suggest Jesus eats with them too. Everyone can be included if they're ready for a space of welcome. This is a new theology in the Gospel of Luke than what we might have found in other Gospels and specifically in Hebrew Bible. There's things that approximate it, but not exactly the same. This has been 3 videos on open commensality in the Gospel of Luke. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope that you go back and read through the Gospel of Luke and look for, where does Jesus eat with people? What is that about? There's a few other aspects we didn't talk about. So, for example, the language of hospitality, relationship with Sabbath. But as you look at it, say, what's going on here? And I hope that these videos have led you to a more thorough understanding. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.